Are are we live? Yes, we are live. Hello, everybody. And yes, that includes Crazy Seth and Crazy Seth the Second. How are all of you doing this fine Saturday stream? Afternoon, evening. Not really sure what time it is where everybody is, because as Marciel has just mentioned, we've got some European viewers out there, so my sense of time is thrown completely out the window. Hey, Gremlin, glad you're able to hop in towards the beginning of this stream. Did you, by any chance, get the opportunity to catch the Mass Effect VOD? Wood bogus, sour cake, but better. Hey, it's 4:30 for me. Hell yeah, crazy. Same here, in fact. So, as you can all see, today is a good old-fashioned Saturday stream, which means we're getting back into talking about DnD. And some of you might have noticed today is going to be a little bit of a larger time block than usual, because I'm going to be working to knock out a couple of the different subclass type homebrew stuff that's been submitted to me to take a look at. Hopefully, Upgrade is out there somewhere, but theirs will actually be the second one we're looking at. So, if you're not out there yet, I hope you'll be able to roll on in for your portion of the stream. Because that's it. Yay, more points for both massive extremes. Yeah. And I wanted to take just a minute to talk a little bit about my massive extremes, just to sort of punch them up a bit. That is right. Ever since the end of Monster Hunter, we are swapping over to a new series of games during my Friday streams. And we are going to be playing through the entire Mass Effect series. We already have my first VOD out for that, though it's a little jank and scuffed due to a few things. And one of them was fixing up a couple of redeems that I've got going. And I wanted to show off that I successfully, I believe, got everything fixed and running as correct timers now. No longer each video running at a different speed, nor all of them running at half speed base. So, during the next Mass Effect stream, things should be running just a little bit smoother. That's all the time we are sparing for talking about Mass Effect. A little plug and time to get into today's stream. For today, we're going to be looking at two, at least in our time block, homebrew subclasses that have been sent to me. The first, sent out by a viewer that we have not actually looked at anything from. I believe on most of their design stuff, they are calling out as Gandian. But for anybody interested, one moment, I'll see if I can pull up their name on Twitch. Yep, Gandian it is. We're going to be starting today with their Frozen Heart. A very unique subclass. One that I'm afraid we're going to have to go a little bit lighter, but Hey, Eric, did you figure out when you plan to do your reading stream? I'm looking at maybe cutting an hour out of my day tomorrow at some time to try and get it up and running. But I do have Dungeons and Dragons myself tomorrow, so we'll have to see if there's time between doing session prep and the session itself. We will most definitely not be running during my usual time block, so I might have to do things a bit earlier in the day, but... Well, thank you, Sour Cake, but better. I appreciate that. Now then, now then, now then. Today we're going to be looking at a interesting style of homebrew subclass coming from the Cryonomica of Krokum, the cold Necromantics for the World of Crocom by Gandhian. These were going to be actually approaching a little bit different than we've looked at, say, the upgrade or my own homebrew, subclass, race, and other items, as this particular addition to the game is designed in a way to make it very unique. It plays around aggressively with a lot of the in-game systems and is sort of designed to stand out from them more so than to be fully balanced, at least from what I've read. Because of this, while I will be bringing up a lot of balanced things, looking at comparisons like I've done in the past, we're dominantly going to be looking at the uniqueness of a lot of these features. Since it seems from design, this was never really meant to be within the usual PHP's wheelhouse. Unlike regular subclasses, the options presented here are designed to be compatible with multiple classes. The classes that are compatible with each subclass option are specified in each subclass's entry. For further ease of use, Appendix A includes some tables that show feature progression for each of the archetypes in this document. Choosing the subclass. When you choose a subclass for your character, such as a bard's bardic college or a wizard's arcane tradition, you may instead choose one of these subclass options, as long as the subclass is compatible with your character's class. You may choose the subclass only once, even if you multi-class into other classes that are also compatible with this subclass. Here we can already see that this is aiming to break the general rules of the PHP, whereby a subclass is something built off of a specific class that plugs into a very specific set of scaling for that class. So looking at homebrewed subclasses, you can usually get a very good idea of where one should fall by looking at the existing class's power spikes and its subclass's power spikes. However, here, as a subclass we will be looking at, the Frostheart can be plugged into both Sorcerer and Warlock. Things become far more complicated. As we will see, the features and the scaling between different classes and different classes of subclass can be very different and can lead to a layer of, if not issue, at least confusion, without certain features are meant to compare to specific scaling styles. Like regular subclasses, the subclass you choose grants your character new abilities at higher levels. When your character would normally gain a new subclass feature, as noted in your character's class table, you gain a feature from this subclass instead. All the subclass features detailed here have a level prerequisite, as noted beneath their name, and you must meet the prerequisite to gain the feature. For example, to gain a feature noted as level 6+, your character must be 6th level or higher in the class for which the subclass was chosen. When you reach certain levels, you might be eligible to choose from among multiple features in the subclass. When you reach such a point, you select one of these features for your character to gain, unless otherwise specified. You could gain no more than one subclass feature at a time. And I want everyone to try to remember as much detail from this section as possible, as this is going to be a very important one when we are discussing the balance and ease of use of this particular module, I want to call it. So now that we have the prerequisites out of the way, we will begin looking at our actual subclass, the Frostheart. Did I miss you reading mine, or did you not read it yet? Yours, Fey Liar, I'm afraid is third on the list. Depending on the time it takes us to get through the first two, we may or may not be able to get to yours today, but I'll let you know I have read through it already, and I've found at least the flavor of it to be very interesting. I do hope you're able to stick it out, but I think with today's time slot, I likely won't be able to get to the Sunshade until next stream. Wait, so it can be used by two different classes, or they need to be both classes? Right now, I believe, for the Frostheart at least, and there are a few others listed in this packet, but for the Frostheart, this is available to both sorcerers and warlocks. At least for this one, there is no claim of needing to multi-class into both of them, but there is a clarifier here. Let's see here. That you can only choose this subclass once. So if you were to multi-class into both Sorcerer and Warlock, you would not be able to take Frostheart twice. Now then, the Frostheart. Upon selecting the Frostheart subclass, you gain two features: Heart of Cold and Frozen Touch. In this subclass's features, any reference to your class refers to the class from which you gained the subclass. If you're a sorcerer, the magic of the Frostheart is the origin of your sorcery. And if you're a warlock, the Frostheart counts as your patron. When you subsequently reach a level in your class, that gives you a subclass feature. You gain one feature of your choice from the option presented here. Each feature has a class level prerequisite, as noted beneath the name. You must meet this prerequisite to gain the feature. So here we can say that even before anything else, simply by selecting the Frostheart subclass, let's see here. Upon selecting the subclass, you gain two features: Heart of Cold and Frozen Touch. This, combined with a lot of earlier specification, brings up my first major point I need to take with this packet. This packet, in its prefix and this call out here, is unfortunately suffering from something that is odd to note on, which is hyper-specificity. The first part of this brings up a lot of major edge cases, possible overlaps, and sets of highly specific rules that, as a player's reading through, is going to put into mind, as well as it can candy in just in time. I'm afraid we're just taking a look at the Frostheart today, but I wanted to start off with a little break from Upgrade's trio of friends. And I'm afraid my first note is a weird one to give. One that I'm calling hyper-specificity. Let's see here. So, when this character would normally gain a new subclass feature, you gain a feature from this class instead. All subclass features have a level prerequisite. So, this is a great thing to bring up in this section because you talk about how there will be multiple choices at each level for features that you can take. So knowing that at level 6, I can still take one of the level 1 features. At level 10, I could take a level 6. If there are options that I want to combo off, this paragraph right here immediately brings to mind and makes the player start to think, okay, there are going to be multiple options. I can't take all of them. but I can come back to them at later levels. This also goes into specifics to state that for selecting a leveled feature, you will only ever be picking one at a time when you may pick. This is very different from how the PHB approaches things, obviously. This is meant to plug into multiple different classes, so this level of specificity is needed because there's a lot of edge cases that are going to exist when you're looking at two different classes. However, we run into an issue immediately with the Frostheart, as the Frostheart has one level 1 feature, two level 1 features, one level 6 feature, one level 10 feature, and one level 14 feature. Okay, all that is basically boilerplate from the Strixhaven UA. All right, I just want to bring up the issue that is arising from you calling all of this out right before this particular subclass option. By reading through kind of this preamble, I now have it in my head that it'll only be gaining one feature per essentially subclass level up. I can understand that. If I can... So, the first thing I notice is there's two level 1 features. Everything else, though, has only one feature at that level. So, because of how I've been preambled and the immediate information I'm seeing, my brain immediately goes to, I am going to be making a choice between one of these two level 1 features. However, that is not true in this case. Upon selecting the Frostheart subclass, you gain two features, Heart of Cold and Frozen Touch. So this means Heart of Cold and Frozen Touch are not actually level 1 features. These are essentially level 0 features. These are not leveled features because they aren't selected by the player at any point. The level here is supposed to be denoting the level you have to be in order to gain these features. But these two features actually exist outside of the leveling system. They are granted by the subclass itself and not by the player choosing between them. This further branches into another issue where there is only one feature at each level progression. If we want to look at the Warlock, they gain their, they gain their otherworldly patron features at level 1, level 6, level 10, and level 14. Since this is supposed to be plugging into the Warlock, that means I get one choice at level 1. However, there are no level 1 features I can grab unless this is saying I get both of these features, and then I can also choose to gain a copy of the feature. I suppose that might be a question to you, Gandian. Am I supposed to be allowed to, for example, take Heart of Cold multiple times? Am I allowed to take the same named feature and stack effects? At level 1, can I gain Heart of Cold when I would gain my normal subclass feature on top of gaining it passively? And then at level 6, could I choose to gain another instance of Heart of Cold? At level 10, can I take another instance of Heart of Cold? I don't imagine that's what you're trying to have happen here. Though I do want, if you're able to confirm that for me, it means that the first patron feature, in context of the Warlock, grants both the level 1 features. Exactly. So what I'm trying to say here is, at least for the Frostheart, this preamble is more harmful than it is helpful, actually, which is strange to say, because the Frozen Heart doesn't actually interact with any of the edge cases that have been brought up to this point and cannot interact with any of them. Since we can only take one instance of each feature, and we are granted both level 1 features, and there's only one feature at each subsequent level, the truth is a player reading through that, yeah, a player reading through this preamble is going to immediately pause, make assumptions, and prepare themselves for the confusion that the preamble is prepping them for. But the Frost Heart is made in such a way that none of those edge cases are going to come up. The player isn't going to be making choices. The player is not concerned at any point with what level the feature is, since they just essentially unlock like a normal subclass, and they don't have to worry about there being multiple choices at any level because there aren't choices present in the Frost Heart. I think this is very fine. It is like most subclasses aren't designed with choice in mind. There are some obvious examples. You can look at hunters, the totem warriors, and the like, where they're kind of founded around making a choice of different paths. But the entire introduction here is preparing the reader, the player, the person who's become interested in what you've made to be granted a lot of choice and a lot of interaction at different levels that at least this first subclass is not delivering. This, I guess, is a weird thing where I'd say so far there aren't any issues with the Frost Heart. It's not anything confusing is happening here. When you're reading through the full wording, you understand everything. But I've been made to understand things I didn't need to. Yeah. So maybe eliminating most, if not all, of the wording and instead providing the progression tables at the start, explaining that if you're X class, you get Y feature at Z level. Yeah, I think, and maybe it's different for the other subclass you made, but for Frost Heart, I don't need levels here. I don't need to be told that Heart of Cold is a level 1 feature because this doesn't do anything for the player. They just gained it. Their level wasn't important to the obtaining of this feature at all. So there's a lot of information here that is very well written, Gandian. I am very excited to read through the rest of this because I understand all of this perfectly. It's just unfortunately not relevant. Both classes have that boilerplate, you have been warned. Yeah. So I think that's just the very first thing I want to break. I just want to say, Gandian, is I understand probably it sounds like a lot of this was you pulling important wording from other features that are similar to yours, but you need to always be making sure you're not over explaining or pulling edge cases that can exist. Because if a player reads, like, I got way too excited when I read, for example, gain a feature noted level 6, your character must be 6th level or higher, in combination with you get to pick one. That's getting my brain into this kind of choice-based, ooh, I wonder what I'm going to be torn between. What two features am I going to have to pick between? Which the subclass doesn't deliver on, essentially. So I would say is if we ignore the introduction from part of Frostheart, zero issue at all. What I'm gaining is very clear and I understand it immediately. It's only confusing when comboed with kind of the boilerplate introduction that you've brought in. Yeah. So it's like I said, this isn't obviously an issue with the design. This is just an issue of hyper specificity kind of biting players in a way that is, I think, probably something you do need someone else to read through to really pick up on what did you expect to happen while you were reading this. We'll definitely revisit Tidy. Hell yeah. So, Let's hear. So we gain 2 features, reference to your class, and we get to know a little bit about our origin. If you're a sorcerer, the magic of the Frost Heart is the origin of your sorcery. And if you're a warlock, the Frost Heart counts as your patron. So here is the last thing I want to say. Didn't deliver on the promises, and I thought would be so nice. Yeah, 100% is kind of the thing to be aware of what can happen with an introduction. Here, there is no real issue with what's been done here. Telling them that as a sorcerer, this means your origin is from the Frost Heart. And if you're a warlock, the Frost Heart counts as your patron. All I'm going to say is this is another much smaller point of kind of a letdown of excitement. As a player who's building a warlock, I love building warlocks, thinking about my patrons and the like. And you've just let me know that the Frost Heart is my patron. I want to know about the Frost Heart. I understand, I believe all of this is very mechanically designed, and I do love that for simplicity's sake. But I think for the Frost Heart, anything that is going to be changing a character's origin, their patron, these kind of integral parts to character building, there needs to be a section included somewhere that has the flavor to it. What is the Frost Heart? I understand this is necromancy, this is cold, there's likely some sort of ice lich relationship to it. And there's a lot of ideas I can come up with, but especially for Sorcerer and Warlock, the people playing around with that really want to hear what you have in mind for what the Frost Heart is. Is it a lich, or is it something a little different? How can it be both a patron and an origin point? A lich, after all, isn't going to be a bloodline. So this immediately gets me excited. You telling me that this is affecting my patron in some way makes me just want something to dig my teeth into. It obviously doesn't need to go here. It could be a preamble for the Frost Heart. Just kind of a big lore breakdown, something with a lot of flavor. But when you, in the text, start mentioning the flavor pieces, that's going to get people really excited to dig their teeth into something. So I'm going to say this is amazingly done to pique interest, to make me want to know more. So it only kind of stings a little bit harsher that, and I understand this isn't the focus of this current document, but it immediately stings that I can't learn what the Frost Heart is here. Off topic from the subclass, but while listening to this, I have thought of a few different strange ideas of making strange subclasses outside of the norm. Hell yeah, Crazy Seth. Were you ever there for me going over my entire class I built from scratch? Because I highly recommend that if you want to see something that is trying to break a lot of rules. Can the Frost Heart not be religion on its own, and prayers develop their patron based on their heart? Or are patrons fixed on a list to choose from? That depends very much on kind of what lore you're living within. Dungeons & Dragons, because it has a lot of homebrew expected lore coming in, leaves a lot of room for you to plug in whatever you want. Simply, though, sorcerers, by raw, have a bloodline that is granting them the power. So that would have to mean that it's sort of a godly bloodline. So you would need a way to separate that from the already existing divine bloodlines. But now that we've got sort of that preamble-y note stuff out of the way, I'm torn between the balance of lore versus DM player creativity and homebrew. 100% Gandian. And if you have some more specific questions, I would love to dig into that once we get through, I think, the features of the class. Like I said, this makes me really want to dig into kind of the lore of it. But it seems like this document is a lot more mechanically focused. So I don't want to over-focus on that when that's clearly not why you made this document. But I will love to discuss it once we're through it. So, the first feature that you gain by becoming a Frost Heart. You learn either the Frostbite or the Chill Touch cantrip. Whenever you would add a spell to your list of known spells, you may change the damage type to either cold or necrotic damage. This trait may only be used the first time you would add the spell to your list of known spells. Once the ability is used on a spell, the spell cannot be added to the list as originally written. Yeah, mechanics first. Yeah, and I could definitely tell that. I just wanted to make sure I got across how much one of your sentences makes me crave the lore. Whenever you gain a character level, you can change a spell you already know to cold or necrotic damage as well, but it cannot be changed back to the original damage type if you would later gain access to the spell again. So, this feature I love and fear, Gandian. And I'll kind of go into a bit of the fear secondary. I usually come up with the base of the lore, then create the balance mechanics of the class at the end to spice the lore of it a bit. So Fireball becomes Frost or Necro Ball. Yes. However, that's not the end of it, Marcial. But we'll get into some of my fears in just a second. So I love this. A lot of characters, players that are building magic casters have a theme in mind. One of the most popular ones, obviously, is a pyromancer, where characters will get a lot of spells, and oftentimes DMs simply house rule that players can learn a fire version of a spell, or can flavor a spell to at least look like fire, even if the damage type isn't actually converted to fire. Players love being able to basically make a theme, make their character idea, and bend things into that idea. And Heart of Cold, I think, is the only, like, if we were, say, to add this would be a unique feature in the PHB in being a mechanicized way to encourage players to bend things into kind of their own idea of what the character is like. Obviously, this comes up with a few issues and questions. I want to start with the question first, Gandian. So, whenever you would add a spell to your list of known spells, you can change the damage type to either cold or necrotic. This trait may only be used the first time you'd add the spell to your list of known spells. So, I'm wondering, what are you imagining to be multiple cases of a player adding the same spell onto their known spell list? Does adding it with this feature change the known spell? Say I learn Ice Fireball, essentially, Ice Ball. I'm gonna have to call it Ice Fireball. Are you imagining there to be a way I can learn Fireball normal in the future? Or is this stating the first time you would add Fireball, you can make it Ice Ball, but you can now only ever have known Ice Ball. You cannot learn Fireball in the future. I'm just a little curious because of the sentence. Yeah, you can only know Ice Ball. So this trait may only be used the first time you would add the spell to your list of known spells. So, are you imagining kind of so this would be outside of PHB, but it's something I know happens in a lot of games. Is this like if a character loses the ability to know a spell? Yeah, and we'll get to that. So you can change the Ice Ball when you level, but you can't change it back. So I guess I just want, this is another instance that I think might be hyper specificity, is what is an instance you're thinking of where it wouldn't be the first time you'd be adding a spell to your list of known spells? No, yeah, Marcial. The Frost Necrotic isn't additional. It's replacing the damage type. So it wouldn't increase, technically, or decrease the damage. It would simply change the type of damage that is occurring. So I don't know. Maybe I'm not coming across right, Gandian, but it was attempt to catch a player for learning Ice Ball and the next trying to select Fireball. Okay, so say they're multi-classing and they have multiple chances to add a spell. This is it might not be necessary. I'm not going to say take it out. I just wanted to point it out as something that raises my interest of what edge case are you trying to think of here. But yes, this trait may only be used the first time you would add a spell to your list of known spells. So obviously, whenever your character gains a level, you can change a spell you know to cold or necrotic damage. So I just want to make sure you know then. So this is saying, if I learn Fireball and ignore this feature, when I level up, I can change that known spell. But I can't say, use my class feature to gain Fireball again, but this time as the ice form. I think that's a fine enough thing to call out, but I just want to make sure you know what edge case you're actually calling out here. Okay. What about spells which are necrotic or frost by nature? Does it increase its efficiency, like increased damage uses? Probably be hard to balance. Yeah, no, Martial, I would never like double reward that. This feature is only, I think, meant to, at its core, be more of a flavor thing. There are a lot of mechanical things we will be discussing in a second about it, but at its core, this is more about bending the flavor of spells to be more in line with sort of your ice necromancer, essentially. Whenever you gain a character level, you can change a spell you already know to cold or necrotic damage as well, but it cannot be changed back to the original damage type if you would later gain access to the spell again. Alright, can I... So, big sad on making overpowered necromancer icemancer. Oh yeah. So basically, like, it's just that... Okay, so I think this is really good. So right here you have a sentence that says, once you've changed a spell, you cannot change it back to the original damage type, even if you would later gain access to the spell. Then up here, the saying, this trait could only be applied the first time you would learn the spell to your spell list. Once it's used on the spell, you cannot add it as originally written. Essentially, these 4 sentences here are kind of covering the same rule twice. And it's neither is unclear in what it's saying, but when reading them back to back, I'm trying to understand why there's both of these sets of restating, once you've learned it, and it's an ice spell, you can't learn it as a not ice spell. Once you've made it an ice spell, you cannot learn it as a not ice spell. It's making me feel like there's something I'm missing in these sentences, an edge case I'm not understanding, that I don't think I'm actually missing here. So this might just be an issue of trying to read through and make sure you're not restating the rule, or if there is an edge case you're trying to catch between saying, once this is used, it cannot be added to the list as originally written. It cannot be changed back to the original damage type if you would later gain access to the spell again. So the first set is to cover getting the spell the first time. The second one is to address the spell you already know before you got the class level. So it cannot be changed back to the original damage type if you would gain access to the spell again. It's just what's a little confusing about, I suppose, the second part. Okay, so that is specifically when you're converting spells like that are ice or necrotic to the other damage type to state that you cannot convert, say, a necrotic spell to an ice spell, then back to a necrotic spell. If you convert it, you're stuck with that conversion. All right. I think I'm understanding. Yeah. So I'm going to say, I can't think of a better way to try to cover all of these edge cases, but I think this is a group of sentences to make sure you read, reread, and even if you really like this form, try it a few times in a few different ways just to see if there any other types of wordings that can make things a bit smoother and cover all the information. Just, I think you can already see, because of how many edge cases exist with this feature, it's going to have to call out a lot of specifics. So there is a very high chance of confusion here. I think you've done a great job of covering those edge cases, but just because of how it's written, it is very much asking a player to read and reread it a couple of times, which isn't bad, but is, yeah, I'm already getting good ideas on a slight rework of the feature. Well, hell yeah, I can't, Ian. So just to say, that isn't bad. It's just something that can be improved and is worth looking at. And now comes to a bit of the confusing stuff with it. One of which Crazy Seth II has brought up. Transforming Chromatic Orb into an ice-only spell. And that is not the end of some of the interesting things that can be accidentally or intentionally done here. So let's see here. Where is damage? That would include a large collection of spells that you might not realize the strangeness in their kind of conversion of damage types. Some interesting examples are going to be Mind Sliver and Magic Stone. One thing to keep in mind, as always, is that damage type conversion, like from fire to ice, is generally okay. But the monsters in the PHB are balanced around the idea of certain damage types occurring in certain ways. Hey Alchemy, how's it going? We're looking at a subclass right now. The great example we've been talking about is Fireball. Fire spells have a lot of high damage AoE spells, and you can look at monsters in the PHB and see that a lot of the bigger monsters tend to have a very interesting relationship to fire damage. Dragons, the red type to be specific, and quite a few other creatures have a higher chance of being resistant to both fire and poison damage, both of which are the most frequently used for large AoE spells. Now, though, that is to say, you will, to a small degree, throw basically blank balance of the game off a bit by allowing any AoE spell to now become a necrotic damage spell, which is one of, outside of undead creatures, amongst beasts, monstrosities, and everything else, necrotic is one of the lowest resisted damages. It's not quite the same as if this was psychic or force damage. I would say absolutely not. You cannot do a conversion to those two damage types, as both of them are intended to be unresistible for the most part, and so their spells tend to be very restricted. Ice and necrotic don't suffer the same level from that, but it's something to keep in mind that there are going to be some really weird instances of some spells being pushed in one direction or another. One of the ones I want to bring up is Magic Stone, or any spell that does bludgeoning damage is going to be a little weird in its conversion to necrotic damage. Other spells that are focused around abilities such as plant growth or earth tremors that might have some damage associated with them. For example, earth tremor, the target can take 1d6 bludgeoning damage and be knocked prone as the earth rumbles beneath them and causes them to fall. But if you're allowed to convert that into necrotic or ice damage, obviously there are ways to flavor that a bit. It's just, there are going to be some spells that are going to feel off in their conversion to ice or necrotic damage. Predominantly spells that are like based around bludgeoning, slashing, or piercing damage, simply because a lot of them tend to be based around moving large quantities of earth, causing plants to lash out and whip. And it's not something that I'd say it would never work. Obviously, a really creative player converting earth, erupting earth into ice damage, saying that there's actually ice glaciers and the like erupting out of the stone causing it. There are good ways to do it, but with spells like Shatter, let's see here, Phantasmal Force, the conversion to ice damage is going to feel weird. It's not going to break balance in any way. It's not going to be impossible to work with. But with spells that are psychically focused, force focused, or that are illusions that can have damage associated with them, I think psychic is going to be the number one weird thing. Not so much with necrotic. Necrotic would probably still work pretty well there. But like you said, it depends on the imagination of the player. So this is, yeah, Andy, very good. Yeah. So this isn't a thing to say you can't do it. I would just say this might be something to include if you are interested in doing a flavor write-up. Talking about how some of the more confusing conversions could be made, I think would be absolutely lovely. How does Phantasmal Force change if you're making it necrotic or ice damage? Can you convert Chromatic Orb to always being ice damage? I think there's going to be a lot of edge cases that you might have to read through a lot of spells to try to come up with, are there edge cases that need to be called up? I'm also thinking that maybe doing a list of damage types that can be converted to either Cold Necron, that could be good. Again, like I said, I don't think you need to put a hard limit on saying Psychic can't become Ice. Just keeping in mind that it's going to be a confusing rule for Psychic and for multiple damage type abilities. What is the best one? 1 second. I don't know if both of these classes get... Yeah, Elemental Bane, I think, is going to be a really good spell for you to look at and really think. Yeah. And really think about how you want this conversion to interact with something like this. Choose one creature you can see within range, and choose one of the following damage types: Acid, Cold, Fire, Lightning, or Thunder. The target must succeed a Constitution saving throw or be affected by the spell for this duration. The first time each turn the affected target takes damage of the chosen type, the target takes an extra 2d6 damage of that type. Moreover, the target loses any resistance to that damage type until the spell ends. This spell is going to bring up two important questions for how you want this effect to work, because two things are happening. This spell already includes cold damage as an option, but if I choose cold on this, do I make cold the only option? Can the spell now only do cold damage? The second thing that is, I think, more interesting to think about is this spell doesn't include necrotic as an option. What I want to do is to choose necrotic and the spell and to add the option. Yeah, they take 2d6 damage of that type. So I think there's going to be a lot of the choice-based spells you're going to want to look at and see and make just sort of the decision whether you want this ability to either A, make these spells always do one type of damage, or more interestingly, can I now add an extra option to these spells? Chromatic Orb was brought up, and there is a long list of other spells that are going to have options that will include. Let's see. I like adding them as options, and I agree, but I think it's going to be very much worth your time to go and find every damage spell that has multiple damage options available to it and see how many edge cases this is going to create for you, and think of the best way you want to really word and make them function with this feature. Could be handled like runes from Diablo 3, but permanent, like adding a higher chance of freezing status. What about Meteor Swarm? Does like multiple types of damage at once? Yeah, so that's just what I'm going to say, is you're definitely going to want to look up all of the spells that have multiple damage types, either as a random choice, as your choice, or that all occur at different parts of the spell, and really examine what you want to do with those edge cases. This would have to be added to all freeze or necro spells. Yeah. So it's just, there's going to be a lot of edge cases with that. So it's going to be something where you really are going to have to go spell by spell and make the choice. How does this affect this spell? Does the way I want it to affect it break multiple things down the chain? Next up is Frozen Touch. Whenever you deal cold or necrotic damage with a spell, you gain a fragment of chromantic energy. You may have an amount of chromantic energy up to, but not exceeding, your proficiency modifier. You lose any unspent chromantic energy when you finish a long rest. As part of casting a spell that deals cold and necrotic damage of first level or higher, you can choose to expend all of the stored cryonic. Ooh. Okay, so that I think is probably just a point where you changed your own terminology, which is just one to bring up, is you have cryonic versus cryomantic. To change the spell, choose one of the options below. Cold Reach. For every point of cryomantic energy expanded, increase the range of the spell by 5 feet. For every 2 points of cryomantic energy expanded, increase the spell's save DC by 1. Hypothermic Fortitude. You gain a pool of temporary hit points. Alright, so you gain temporary hit points equal to twice the cryonic energy spent. This pool remains even when it reaches 0 and disappears after finishing a long rest. Now, this obviously lives in a very similar world to what sorcerers already have access to, being the meta magic abilities. I guess just one question is, do you imagine, example, Cold Reach being comboed off with the sorcerer's ability to already increase a spell's range? Let's see here. Where is meta magic? Distance spell. So let's hear. When you cast a spell that has a range of 5 feet or greater, you can spend 1 sorcery point to double the range of the spell. So this is going to be an interesting point to think about, is when does Cold Reach get applied? I would imagine it would be applied after you double the range of the spell, but there will be some people thinking, okay, can I increase the spell's range by 5 feet and then double it, doubling the 5 feet I've added? And also, it might be worth it for Cold Reach to add in the specificity that already exists here when you cast a spell that has a range of 5 feet or greater, just to make sure players aren't trying to jank your rules into affecting kind of self-targeting spells to try and make them ranged in one way or another. So I think here, obviously, this is borrowing very heavily from the idea of meta magic and creating a more like interesting resource system for it. I like this a lot more, how you earn points through dealing these damage types that you're guaranteed to have access to, and that giving you points to work with. Um, let's see. I think there might be a question of players wanting to start with some sort of minimum pool. I might recommend adding in at the end of every long rest, you put yourself at half proficiency points yourself, just so players who are at 0 points can start off a fight round one at least being able to use one of these fun abilities. Telling a player they have to get into a fight in maybe a very low combat campaign can feel bad. It might end up breaking the balance you're imagining, Gandian, so feel free to tell me to kind of shut up on this particular one. Keep in mind, cantrips can get you points, but you can only spend them on spells of first level or higher. Yeah, so I'm just saying it might be better to say like you start only ever with 1 or 2 points at the end of each long rest. But I just think allowing a player to start a campaign, to start a session, whether it's a one-off or not, allowed to play with this feature right off the bat is, I think, going to be the most fun way to work with it, but also might be out of balance with what you're imagining. Yeah, so maybe you gain one if you have none every time you roll initiative. I like that. That's very similar to kind of how Arcane Archer features can work, where if they start a turn with none of their arcane shots, they regain one. So I think I really like that. Just and I'm saying this isn't like a balance issue or anything. This is something where players want to play with their features. So it's best to allow them to play with it at least at the minimum level right off the bat. Question, is there a way to lose points over time, or do you keep them until they're spent? I imagine you keep them until they're spent, kind of like how the meta magic system works. I'm more so just saying you don't lose over time, but it resets at the end of a long rest. Yeah. So I just think, and this is more of a thing of just gotta let your players play with it right off the bat. I think that's it's not the most balanced approach, I think, which is weird for me to be kind of bouncing around between balancing and unbalancing, but it's just something super, super good feeling for a player to at least be able to say, I only start with 1 point, but I do start with a point, so I get to use this fun thing. The other thing, like I said, for Cold Reach, I would look into, first of all, stealing this part of the text when you cast a spell of at least a 5 foot range or greater. I think that'd be great just to plug in, just to kind of keep that edge case grab in. You increase the spell by 5 feet. This one, I think you might have to call out whether this happens before or after any other spell distance changing occurs. I think the only case that exists in Raw. I gotta go, busy some. Oh, I'm sorry, Alchemy. But just because people can double their spell distance using distance spell, I think it's probably worth it to kind of call out that edge case and state whether this 5 feet is added before or after any other range adjustments are made to the spell. Oh, because the spell of the range of touch, you can spend 1 sorcery point to make the range of 30 feet. Oh god, I have never looked at sorcerer before. That is terrifying. You also burn all of the points whenever you use the feature, only getting the ability to choose how many points you spend at higher levels. Let's see here. Chilled to the bone. For every 2 points of cryomantic energy expended, increase the spell save DC by 1. So Gandian, I love and fear this. I love this because I want more things in D&D to play with spell DC. It is one of the least interacted with numbers for most features and magic items that is so good feeling for a caster to play with. As a caster, being able to even say +1 to a spell DC is so amazing, but it's also amazing because of how impactful it is. So let's hear. Just to do some quick math. So it's 2 points to increase spell DC by 1, and you can store up to your proficiency modifier. Let's see here. One moment, as I'm going to just spend a second looking up, let's see here, D&D 5e proficiency chart. Yeah, so it goes from 2 to 6. All right. So this is capped at maximum level at 6 total points. So that's a total increase of a spell DC by 3. All right, no, I think you did a great job on this. I just really wanted to run that math because, like I said, spell DC manipulation is very powerful. +1 to a spell DC is stronger than a +1 weapon, which is on its own an uncommon magic item. As a level 1 feature, being able to, and this might not be as consistent as I'm imagining, but very consistently getting one of your spells to be +1 DC feels like it can be very dangerous. What I'd say is I feel like this feature is very dangerous level 1 through level 3. But I feel like from level 3 onwards, I think it's perfectly balanced. I would just say I can't think of a good way. I wish I could think of a good way to bring it back just a hair at levels 1 through 3. But I can't think of a really easy, smooth way to do it. That might be something for you to consider, Gandian. I think level 1, 2, and 3 are the only trouble points for this, and it's only a hair stronger than I would like. But I don't think it's a massive issue at all, and I'm honestly impressed, once I math this out, how well balanced this is for 90% of all the other levels. Hypothermic fortitude is, I think, mostly suffering right now from sentence structure and wording. You create gain a pool of temporary hit points. Very obviously is just a typo there, but even if I remove the typo and just kind of say this how temporary hit points are, you gain a pool of temporary hit points equal to twice the cryonic energy spent. This pool remains even when it reaches 0 and fully disappears after finishing a long rest. I'm not reading this. I have to ask, Andy, did you play a lot of 4th edition? It's based on the abjuration ability. We'll definitely try to clean it up. All right, so abjuration, you say. Because what I'm going to say is all the temporary hit point effects I can think of are you gain temporary hit points. It's not obviously it is a pool of hit points, but they're not generally described as a pool because you are gaining hit points that can replace other hit points. And it's just you have temporary hit points. They don't automatically replenish themselves. So let's see here. So here the ward. So the ward has a hit point maximum equal to twice your resistance. Whenever you take damage, the ward takes damage instead. If this damage reduces it to 0 points, you take 0. While the ward has 0 hit points, it can't absorb damage, but magic remains. Whenever you cast an abjuration spell, you regain a number of hit points. Okay, I think I wouldn't base this off the abjuration ability. I would base this off of already existing temporary hit points, Because you're not summoning a thing here, you're just using this to gain temporary hit points. I would say, what, false life, I believe? Or fucking the armor of Ag... Damn it. Okay, we'll do armor. Hey, Folan! How's it going? So I would just look at Armor of Agathis and just say, whenever, you know, this ability procs, you gain blank amount of temporary hit points. And you just don't need to put a duration on it. I think I would just reword it entirely to say, let's say you gain temporary hit points equal to twice the cryonic energy spent. I don't think you need to make this a pool because it doesn't automatically replenish when you do other things. You only regain these points once you use this ability again, and you're only going to use this ability when you're casting something. Unless you're imagining these temporary hit points being able to stack on top of temporary hit points, which is exactly what temporary hit points are not supposed to do, I would recommend just approaching this as gaining temporary hit points and not as an empty pool of points. They can be refilled and topped off later on. Okay. I suppose I'll keep reading then. I'm just going to say I'm a little nervous of that, but I'll see once I get to that kind of step of the feature. Let's hear. Great taste, but part 5's the better besides Kira's theme. Are you guys talking about fucking Death Note? Alright. Level 6, Frostheart. You gain... Oof, excuse me. You gain resistance to your choice of either cold or necrotic damage, and gain 1 cryomantic energy whenever you take either damage type from any hostile source. Good save there. Oh my god, Asmodeus! Treat yourself to a chalky bar, Eric. You deserve it. Thank you for the $3 donation. Asmodeus. How do you do? You now gain 2 cryonic energy instead of 1 whenever you deal cold or necrotic damage with a spell. You become immune to the cold. You no longer take levels exhaustion from cold weather or exposure. This, I think, is very good. I honestly don't think I have any major notes with this feature. As I mentioned before, I don't think for this entire subclass you need kind of this level breakdown. But isn't that the ruler of the 9 layers of hell? Folan, let's... Come on. We're not here to discuss people's work, okay? This is about fun and D&D. Oh, Jojo, you fool. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's here. I might want to look at resistance to either cold or necrotic. I'd be a little nervous about this. I think the only resistance characters ever gain to a damage type at this point is poison by level 6. Some races even earlier. But poison is already kind of the most resisted damage in the game. That gaining resistance to it isn't a huge step. Gaining resistance to frost and necrotic is more potent, but not to, I think, a broken degree, especially when you have a clever DM. I think... Yeah, I think I'm a little nervous. I would say this might be worth looking at other... Yeah. Bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, though of only the non-magical variant. So there's just kind of that to consider. I think ultimately it would be fine, but... And you might have already done this, Gandhi, and this is one I'd say, look at all existing classes, subclasses, and any features that grant resistance. At 6th level... Let's see here. Actually, maybe we can look around at some magic items. 6th level feature, I think, is fine to be in line with most uncommon and a couple of rarer magic items. So let's see here. Maybe already made some notes on refining that feature. So armor of resistance is rare. So, okay. So, yeah, I think resistance to cold would fit very well at level 10. It would be perfectly in alignment at level 10. I think at level 6, it's a little early. Not as early as you would think. Honestly, I think it would work at level 8. It's more so I would split the difference between 6 and 10 is right where I would put gaining resistance to cold. So I think really, Folan? I mean, I'll I'll do it. I'll fucking let's see here. Okay, I'll put it on the clock. We'll get that overheat going for you. We'll check back in that with that in a bit. I'll make sure not to use my sniper for the next 5 minutes. Sorry about that, Gandian. Bruh. I know, right? So I think this sucks to say. I don't think you need to remove it. I don't think it's so out of place, but this might be a feature to maybe look at some of the effects you have at level 10 and see if there's something you can trade the resistance to a later choice and to gain another feature at this point. It's just one step too early to be gaining that, I think. But it's not like a huge step, which is where I'm kind of stuck. I think it's slightly stronger than it should be, not to a broken degree, but to one that I think it's worth looking this feature over and seeing if there's a way to more easily rebalance it. I love forcing. I love the next part of this. Gaining one chromatic energy whenever you take the damage of that type from a hostile source. 100% love it. Don't change it. If anything, I would find it hilarious if you swap this earlier and you made whenever you take the damage being the original form, and then you upgraded it to 2 points at this form and gained dealing damage at this form. But that's because I am a cruel person who wants to make players think what's the best way for me to take damage. You probably shouldn't don't actually do that, Candian. That's me being my mean-brained self. But if you want to, go right on ahead. I just thought that sounded so much funnier that I couldn't resist throwing it out there as an option. So you now gain 2 cryonic energy. I like kind of that scaling, but again, I would love to see it more based on taking damage than giving the damage. You become immune to the cold. Oh yeah, cold weather exhaustion immunity. Perfect here. I love that feeling of this being kind of that level where you gain a lot of small features. And I think that's the perfect one to plug in. The only thing I would say to really examine here is that resistance to cold and necrotic. It feels a little too strong, a little too early, and there might be a better time to bring this in later, or a way to kind of balance it down slightly that I think would be really worth it. Wait, can I damage my fellow party members? Only if you're a hostile source, crazy, which is why I really like this wording. You have to be hostile, and that doesn't mean an ally who's taking a hostile action. That means you have to actually be hostile to the character. Let's see here. Cryonic Shell. Whenever you use any ability from the features, the Frozen Touch, you may gain temporary hit points equal to the amount of cryonic energy used. These temporary hit points can be used to recharge the pool of temporary hit points gained by hypothermic strength if it's active, but cannot exceed the maximum set by the initial use of the ability. Honestly, I I don't love this feature at all. I don't think it's busted. I'm not overly confused by it. It's just kind of it might be pretty powerful in game, But on reading, let's see, whenever you use an ability feature for, you also gain temporary hit points equal to the amount of cryonic energy used. So at maximum, I gain 6 hit points. This feels really low powered, especially for level 10. Let's see here. These temporary hit points can be used to recharge the pool of temporary hit points gained by hypothermic strength if it's active. Cannot exceed the maximum set by the initial use of the ability. Yeah, honestly, I would say with Cryonic Shell and Hyperthermic Fortitude, I would just go ahead and make Hyperthermic Fortitude just temporary hit points. Don't make it a pool that gets slightly recharged by a later feature. I would just make this gain temporary hit points. In Cryonic Shell, I would take major look at, let's see here, I'll get spells up, at the Armor of Agathis, and instead start augmenting your temporary hit points to start doing things like damage. If I can read off, Armor of Agathis is a protective magical force surrounds you, manifesting as a spectral frost that covers you and your gear. You gain 5 temporary hit points for the duration. If a creature hits you with a melee attack while you have these hit points, the creature takes 5 cold damage. At higher levels, you gain more temporary hit points and increase the amount of damage, respectively. What I think would be a lot more fun with Cryonic Shell is instead of making it... Basically, all Cryonic Shell is doing is adding you gain 6 temporary hit points to the end of these 3 features. And that, I'm going to say, doesn't feel crazy. Initially, I actually had Fortitude ability just casting Armor of Agathis, and Cryonic Shell allow you to refill the points. Yeah, I think, honestly, and if this is a feature you're in love with, this idea of a refilling pool of temporary hit points, then ignore me. Like, if that's something that you're really wanting to sink your teeth in, go ahead and play around with it. What I'm going to say, though, is I don't think that playing around with that temporary hit point pool is really helping the subclass here. I don't feel like it's really playing in with kind of this augmentation, this cold focus, this kind of necrotic feel that most of everything else is really playing into. And it's just sort of a really finicky, every turn, maybe 6 temporary hit points or not. That's just super underwhelming. And at level 10, I feel is probably, honestly, I think Cryonic Shell is weaker than Icy Resistance in every way. And I think, honestly, Cryonic Shell either needs to be pushed and traded in with Icy Resistance, making this the level 6 and this the level 10, or needs to be really looked at again from the beginning, just because mathematically it's not super effective at all, and by flavor and mechanically it's not very interesting. It doesn't interact with an interesting way and with any of these features. It doesn't create a cool combination with the frost and ice magic you're using. It's honestly, because it's being applied to a warlock and a sorcerer, characters who aren't normally playing around with their hit point pool to begin with. It's also a feature you're almost not wanting to use. It occupies a weird space within the build overall. I think is number one what you want to look at and really feel what you want this subclass at level 10 to feel like. I get what you say. At the end, he has most of the broken oh gosh. With the question of changing spells to Frost Necrotic, could that be applied to spells that grant resistances? I think right now, as written, crazy, is it only applies to damaging spells. Alright. And then moving on to the final one, Homeostasis Control. You can cast the slow spell at will and requiring no spell slots, number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, regaining all uses at the end of a long rest. The spell has the following modifications. This spell no longer requires concentration. This spell only targets a single creature. Now, this is something I did a lot with the class I made, where this idea of kind of modifying an existing spell. I see kind of where you're going with this. Number one thing to always consider if you're going to be doing a modified spell, especially if you're changing two key features of it, is it might be worth it just to rewrite the spell from scratch and just make a new spell that is super similar to it. Simply because this is slow, correct? So slow, you are removing concentration, which can be scary, but you're moving it from an AoE spell, which is probably the main reason it had concentration, to being a single target spell. I think when I was first reading this, I got scared shitless that this was going to be super broken. I don't think it's super broken. Honestly, I'm more in love with this feature the more I think about it than I initially was. It's a little weird in that essentially you have a character casting what is going to equate to about a second level spell. A thing to keep in mind here is that your caster still, although they don't have to waste concentration on this, and they don't have to waste spell slots on it, they do still have to use their action whenever they want to use this. I think slow is a fine spell, but there's just a few edge cases here you're going to have to look at. First things first, looking at slow, let's hear, it doesn't have a level bump, I think. Let's hear, let's hear, that's here on 11 or higher. The spell is fake until the creature's next turn. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about spell levels at all, so that's perfect. Perfect spell to choose for this. You do have to wonder if a player is going to be wanting to use their action 6 turns in a fight to cast this spell, especially because at the 14th level they're going to have access to 7th, 6th, and 5th level spells, which are going to be so terrifyingly more effective than whatever slow is able to do, that I think balance-wise, I love Homeostasis Control. 6 casts of a level 6 spell, where you don't, or a level 3 spell that is a little narrowed down in that you only hit one target, but you don't have to worry about concentration. I think that is fine for a level 14 feature. Power-wise, I think this is perfect, and it's super interesting and creates this really debuffy playstyle that I love. I just want to warn you that I think a lot of players, sorcerers and warlocks at level 14, I think more so sorcerers, warlocks might be narrowed down on spell slots enough that this feature is going to feel great to play with. And in fact, I'm going to say that a warlock is going to love this feature, giving them basically double their spell slots, even though it's narrowed down to only one spell, is going to feel great. Sorcerers are going to be, I think, a lot less in love with this feature because they have a lot more options to be casting level 7, 6, and 5 level spells instead of even thinking about 3rd level spells. This might be a feature that'll be used during a slog where resources have been stretched to their limit. But I'm going to say right now, this feature might need to take a look at it to make it more appealing for sorcerers, a little stronger. It can be quickened by a sorcerer, but so could a higher level spell, is what I'm saying. A sorcerer, I think, is going to be more in love with the idea of casting 7, 6, and 5 level spells than they are going to be interested in coming towards this feature. So I don't think this feature is like too strong or too weak. I think, in fact, the warlocks are going to love it, but I think you're really going to want to think about what it's going to take for a sorcerer who let's take a look at sorcerer and how many spell slots they have at level 14. So at level 14, they're going to have 4 spell slots that are so aggressively stronger that they're going to be wanting to use these first. Now, if we ignore Quicken for a second, which maybe isn't fair, but just to start from there, that means at least 4 rounds of spells that are a no-brainer to choose over slowed that are just always going to be chosen. If you add in Quickened, maybe you can bring that down to 2 kind of rounds of pumping out all these heavy-duty things. But even so, that's going to be at a point where a lot of their sorcerer points are already burnt up. And they're probably still going to be more interested in looking at their 3 4th level slots or regaining these higher level slots using their meta magic than they're going to be interested in looking at using the slowed spell. I don't know. What I see you're saying true. I don't know. What are you thinking? What now that you're kind of looking at these numbers of much higher effects, what would you want to kind of do to this feature to really get a sorcerer interested in it? Something that would really pull them towards that idea. That this having these kind of low level debuff spells that you can basically cast for free. Maybe it's able to augment a spell of the chosen damage type, but it takes a bonus action. Maybe. We could just make it also able to like an extra augmentation on it and say that it is only a bonus action. What is slow? Yeah, slow's an action, so you could just augment it to make it a bonus action. That might make it a little more attractive, but you still wouldn't be able to cast it and a higher level spell, I think. I don't think sorcerers are allowed to break that rule, where it would have to be a cantrip in a spell. Let me look at Quickened. Cast a spell, cast it with 1 action. You can spend 2 years to change casting time to a bonus action. Yes, they would still only be able to do that spell and a cantrip. It might be worth it. Yeah, let's hear. What is a level 14 example that we have here? Aberrant. Mind. Revelation in flesh. You can unleash aberrant truth hidden in yourself as a bonus action. You spend 1 or more sorcery points to magically transform your body for 10 minutes. Alright, what is your level 14? Gain to the ability to align your consciousness. For 1 minute, for the duration, attack rolls against you benefit advantage. Maybe make an attack roll. I'm thinking of making it a choice for the player. 1 action on its own, or 2 a bonus action after casting a spell that does colder. That is, I think, interesting. I think it's very dangerous, but at level 14, you are free to be a lot more dangerous. Yeah, so I think I really love your second idea. I think what would be great here is for everyone just saying, whenever you cast a spell that deals cold or necrotic damage, you may immediately, as a bonus action, cast slow at this free reduced form. Whether you'd want to cast it on the creature that was damaged, I think that's really good for narrowing it down. If you want it to be a second target, that broadens it out. I think kind of really thinking how you want this spell to feel would be good, but I really like that second choice of making this an immediate bonus action once you've dealt kind of the expected damage type. I have an idea. Maybe it could increase the number of possible stacks of shards when hitting enemies. Okay. Yeah. But I think with that, Gandian, and right at the 6 o'clock mark for me, we have kind of gotten through this and discussed kind of my major points here. Number one, look out for the hyper specificity that's occurring here, especially when it isn't going to be affecting the class you're building. For Heart of Cold, please look at all of the multiple damage type spells and make sure this is still going to work for spells that do random damage, that give you a choice of damage, or that inherently deal two different damage types. About to head off and watch Black Widow. All right. Frozen Touch, I like, but really look at the specificity for Cold Reach, especially for sorcerers who can double spell range, and thinking about when you want it applied. And I'd say entirely relook into Hyperthermic Fortitude and the Cryonic Shell. I love Icy Resilience, though maybe give a moment of thinking about if there's a way to better balance out gaining that cold or necrotic resistance, whether that's pushing it later or adding some stipulations to it. And I think you've already got down what I think for homeostasis and a really cool way to make it a little more engaging and a little more attractive for characters that are going to have a lot more higher impact spells they can use. Gandian, I hope this was actually a good experience for you, and I want to know how'd you feel about us going through your frozen heart of kind of the comments that came out here, the notes, and kind of what chat feels. I know I tend to get really into the criticism on this, so if you're still around and haven't headed out yet, want to know how you're feeling, what you thought, and if you have any really specific questions last minute before you. It was very good, excellent feedback. I'm glad. I'm glad. There's nothing else. I'd like to give everybody, including you, Gandian, just a couple of minutes. If anyone has any questions they want to ask Gandian, if you have any questions you want to ask chat as a whole and not just me, so I look forward to seeing you lose your mind in a good way when you see the Magnus Cryomantic. That is true. That is a boy with some questions involved. But we will be getting to that on a very different week. All right. Well, we're going through and just seeing if any other chat members of Gandian have any questions or comments you'd like to get out. Upgrade, are you out there by any chance? Questionable life choices, you mean? No. You know. Let's see here. Upgrade, if you're not in chat, Liar, are you still in chat? I know I said I wouldn't be getting to your boy, but if Upgrade's not here and you still are, I might be very easily persuaded to instead looking at your boy next instead. Not very interesting, but I slowly got lost in thoughts that I had about another thing. That tends to be how looking at Homebrew works. Alright, see you, Gandian. I do hope to see you in the future. Let's see here. I'm gonna send a quick question on it. Oh! Let's see here. Hey. Are you still out there? And upgrade. All right. Well, I'll give that a couple of minutes to see if either of our two boys want to kind of pop in for their examination. If I end up not hearing from either of them, we'll just go ahead and look at Upgrade Survivalist and save Sunshade for next week. I don't think either are here. Yeah, that's kind of what it's looking like. But either of them get back to me in the next 2 minutes or so, we'll go ahead and focus down their boy. But while we're taking a minute here, how is everyone else feeling? My opinion, the cryo energy has a lot of potential, maybe increase the functionality and use by players. Examination, snaps, latex glove. Okay, Folan. Bad. Bad. There's no need to be looking where you seem to be wanting to look, alright? Folan, stop. Stop right there, criminal scum. You violated the law. Alright, alright. Seems like I'm not hearing from either of them. So we will go ahead and hit up the boy I am most prepped for, and who's already next on the list. I just realized I lost a bunch of the things that I had been working on for the last year. I'll have to try to recover them by memory. If we don't crack open the hood, how are we going to see if any oil is spilling? Sure, that's what you were saying, Poland. Sure it is. And so today we will be looking at the third and final subclass brought to us by our friend Upgrade, the man who brought us kind of the major subclasses that started this big homebrew examination. And today we're looking at the subclass for the Rangers called the Survivalist. Survivalist Rangers are the people who, either of their own choice or out of need, had learned to live in the most precarious conditions and how to make the most out of the little they have. Trained to procure sustenance for nearly nothing, and tempered by the wild around them. These individuals make fierce fighters and wondrous guides in traveling the harshest of wilds. Random D&D question. What's your favorite monster by aesthetic? I love beholders. I love aboleths. There's something about them that is just so interesting. Ranger supremacy down, Folan. How could you say something so brave and yet so heretical? Alright. Adapt and improve. Starting at 3rd level, you have come to learn from the creatures and critters of the wild and have based certain survivals and combat tactics off of them. At 3rd, 6th, and 10th level, you choose a survival tactic from the following list. Whenever you level up, you can choose to exchange old survival tactics for new ones as well. Just off, the very first thing I wanted to point out is where this is clearly borrowing from. It is both an existing ranger subclass called the Hunter, which comes with a kind of narrow choice of different paths you can kind of take with them, similar to fighting styles that get kind of added on that have just a series of bonuses. More specifically, I feel like this is drawing pretty heavily from the Barbarian Totem subclass, which has a series of animal totems, all of which provide 2 interesting buffs associated with them. The Boar. Your movement and walking speed is increased by 10 feet. If you move at least 20 feet in a straight line towards an enemy, when you make a melee weapon attack using your strength, you can add another 1d6 damage to your weapon attack. Additionally, the enemy must make a strength saving throw against a difficulty challenge equal to 8, plus your strength mod, plus your proficiency mod, or be knocked prone. The bear. You gain a climbing speed equal to your movement speed. It still requires you to use a hand and legs freely. This doesn't work on surfaces that require you to be upside down. Additionally, you have advantage on perception checks based on smelling and on grappling checks. Wolf. You have advantage on perception checks based on hearing and smell. Additionally, you have advantage on your attack rolls against enemies if an ally is within 5 feet of them. Crocodile. You gain a swim speed equal to your movement speed. Additionally, you can hold your breath for up to 15 minutes and have advantage on Constitution saving throws regarding suffocation. Hawk. You have advantage on vision-based perception checks. Additionally, you have advantage on dexterity checks and saving throws that involve jumping, falling, or breaking a fall in any way. Fox. You gain advantage on stealth and acrobatic checks. Your steps make no sound. You could spend your bonus action to do a dash or hide action. Additionally, you can squeeze in spaces meant for one size smaller than yours, with no penalty. Now, this has a couple of interesting steps to it, because this is a choice-based kind of thing, but is relaxed in a degree. At 3rd, 6th, and 10th level, you are going to be choosing one of these tactics. Meaning by 10th level, you're now going to have 3 of these tactics adopted. Another major point is a lot of these, not all of them, can be broken down into 3 honestly pretty powerful bonuses that can come in. The boar, I believe, is the one with the strongest raw bonuses to it. First, you start with an increase to your movement speed of 10 feet. This is something that is nearly in line with monks and is stronger than any racial movement speed bonus that occurs, with wood elves, I think, gaining a +5 and certain races gaining a -5 to their movement speed. Not only do you gain this movement speed, but you also gain, if you've moved 20 feet, you get to deal additional damage with a melee attack. This also, though, applies multiple times, meaning this is a bonus damage that if you're able to move 40 feet in a round, which is the base movement speed of most classes, is going to be able to proc this probably 2 times a fight if everything is set up in a way that they can use it, especially as players are allowed to circle enemies without proccing attacks of opportunity. So not only is the movement speed increased, is damage able to be applied as a bonus, but also they gain the opportunity to be knocking enemies prone. So run and gun punish gameplay. It sounds pretty cool. Yeah, I think I really like where the boar is pushing. It's pushing players into a very interesting playstyle, or at least a potentially interesting playstyle. However, I want to immediately compare this to the totem. Let's see here. An example would be the bear totem. While raging, you have resistance to all damages except psychic. It also makes, and the spirit of the bear makes you tough enough to stand up to any punishment. So here, the totem of the bear is giving you 1 bonus under a condition, followed by flavor text. Hey, upgrade, perfect timing. We just started on the breakdown of your boy, and I'm going to say right now, the Survivalist Adapt and Improve is coming in crazy powerful. I love the flavor here, just looking at the boar. But the boar is coming with three bonuses: the increased movement speed, increased damage, the ability to knock prone attached to an action, not separated from it. Whereas I believe this is based off of the Barbarian's totem class. These totems tend to come with one conditional bonus. While you're raging, your creatures have disadvantage and opportunity attacks when against you, and you can use the dash action as a bonus action. Yeah, so it only works for strength. Bear only works while you're raging. Bear gains you a resistance to all damage except psychic. The boar, let's see here, I can close out some of this. The boar gains you increased movement speed, increased damage, and the ability to knock people prone off of a free action, essentially. I think this, for level 3, is really powerful. When comparing it to the Hunter Ranger, which also gets some choices, when you hit a creature weapon attack, that takes an extra 1d8. If it's below its hit point maximum, you can only deal this once per turn, is to a degree comparable to the boar's bonus damage, but even this doesn't come with bonus movement speed or like an ability to move them around. With the Barbarian, let's see if is there a damage bonus here. Not really a damage bonus. Movement speed, here we go. You gain 10 feet of movement speed and 3 feet to your jump, but that's it. The boar is essentially equivalent to the tiger plus, basically. Like, it's almost the tiger plus the eagle here. It's the Colossus Slayer plus additional extra features. Yeah, the Ranger is also weaker than the Barbarian. All right, so we'll look at the Ranger's Hunter class. The Colossus Slayer is coming with 1d8 damage, which is more, but this can only be procced once per turn. This doesn't come with bonus movement speed. This doesn't come with bonus manipulation. I think the boar, at least, is very... Well, okay, but boars are pretty dangerous, that's true. I think by comparison to almost any other similar feature at 3rd level, this alone is very powerful. I think the simple fact that almost all of these can be broken down into about 3 unique bonuses that are all pretty decent. Let's see here. Obviously, the very next one I look at additionally. Yeah, I think the bear fits very well. I think the fact that it has 2 bonuses, okay, and grappling checks, I could kind of break that into a 3rd, but more of a half there. So I'd say bear is a climbing speed equal to your movement speed with condition, and you have advantage on perception and grappling checks. I feel like the bear, honestly, I have no complaints comparing it to the other ones. It does have a little more option than the Barbarian does, but Rangers tend to be a little more versatile, and I don't feel like it's playing around with really powerful features such as base movement speed, base damage, and prone knocking. The wolf, you have advantage on perception checks against hearing and smelling. So that's here. So we'll just break that into its own little feature. Additionally, you have advantage against... So that's almost basically what the wolf is. While you're raging, your friends have advantage melee against rolls with enemies adjacent to you. So it's a little different, but I think functionally it's very same. It's granting of advantage to basically enemies with an adjacent ally. This is to you as opposed to your allies, but I think it's still pretty similar. It is coming in with this advantage on perception checks based on hearing and smelling, but that isn't a massive out of line bonus. I made Boar stronger a bit because I was stuck to only work on strength melee based attacks. See, you've tried using the ancient weapon stone of pig smiting. Mm-hmm. God damn, y'all really dropping fucking abridged quotes on me. And so you gain swim speed. Usually you can hold your breath for 15 minutes. Yeah. So here you have, let's see here, advantage on vision and perception checks. Additionally, dexterity checks and saving throws while jumping, falling, or breaking a fall. Yeah. So pretty strong, but it also makes the ranger do a playstyle that slaps them into melee and is not usual for rangers who usually go ranged. I am going to disagree with that assessment upgrade. A majority of rangers that I encounter get pretty well split between going ranged or going melee. The ranger works very well with a hunter's mark dual wielding setup that I've seen a lot of players do as a strength based get in there and fight like most martial classes do. And most rangers I've encountered when they go for the melee enjoy going strength. I do agree that there is a limiter there, but rangers are not going to be punished for choosing to go strength in that way. You can definitely say most rangers go ranged. Most rangers go dexterity. But if a ranger is going boar, they are signing themselves up to do a strength-based build. So their build will be strength-based and isn't going to be super inherently punished in that direction. Yeah, rangers usually do a flip between melee and range, while there might be an attraction to dexterity. That's if they're choosing to go dexterity. If they're going to go boar, they're going to go strength. And so to say, but most go dexterity, isn't really an argument against the character that is going to min-max their strength build. Ultimately, I feel like boar, maybe if you just cut one of these features, would be a lot more in line, but it is coming in with basically 3 unique and very powerful features, where almost every other one is coming in with just 2. And yeah, I see you're saying fair. And it's really the only one in this list I think I have any real issue to take with. Let's see. Gain advantage in stealth acrobatics checks. That one might be a little dangerous. Let's see here. Alright. Fox is another weird one. Let's see here. So you gain advantage on stealth and acrobatics checks. Your steps make no sound. You can spend a bonus action to dash or hide. And you can squeeze into spaces meant for one size smaller than yours with no penalty. Yeah, I think Fox might be another one here that is getting a bit too much going on here. This combination of features right there is already, let's see here, an item now that I'm really looking at it kind of broken down. 1 second. What is it? I'll just do boots. Because that is the uncommon magical item, Boots of Elvenkind, quite obviously. Let's hear. And an uncommon feature at level 3, I think, is very, very powerful. I don't think it's brokenly powerful, but the simple fact that you could be gaining essentially a free uncommon magic item plus the rogues kind of bonus. Obviously, they don't have the disengage here, which is a little more than dash or hide are. So I don't think this is on its own broken at all to be gaining. Could reduce dash and height as well as the one size square squeeze. But I'm going to say this one, honestly, I think you could tag this anywhere and it's not going to break the balance of anything. This is a super flavorful, and while it could be very useful, I don't think this is going to throw anything off. But I think, yeah, the fox needs to be brought down somewhere. And I think one of the features to remove is going to be steps making no sound, or the bonus action being able to squeeze mechanics are still a thing. 100% they're still a thing, but I don't think that they are all going to be the make or break of balance. And I love that you're playing around with that feature just because that is a fucking adorable to imagine, because all this is giving me is just the sight of a little fox squeezing through something. And number two, it's really an irregular play style, an irregular mechanic that while it exists, I don't think players tend to think about it a lot, simply because there aren't a lot of features that bring it up. So I'm going to encourage you to keep that boy in there. Steps with no sound might be taken out. All right, yeah. Yeah, I think basically all the other boys I don't really have much of an issue with. But in their current states, boar and fox feel definitely A, stronger than all the other options, and B, much stronger than anything else at level 3. The squeeze is amazing, and I love it reminding of the thing I did when I got bored and made a slime race. I think I'd take out the prone ability from the boar and leave the damage. Okay, gotcha. And are you imagining the damage being able to be procced multiple times? I know maybe you're not in the kind of in the same comparison as it was Totem Warrior. But for example, where is it? The Tiger? No. Who's gaining damage? Oh, right. That was the Ranger Hunter. Their damage was reduced to only happening once per attack. I believe, did yours say, if you move 20 feet in a straight line, make a melee attack, you can add 1d6 to your weapon. Yeah, but you can move, especially with the bonus of 10 feet, 20 feet in a straight line at least twice in a match, or in a round. So I'm just curious if you're wanting this to be something that can be procced multiple times in a round. I'm sorry, I gotta drop off. Do make the notes, though, and link me to the whisper to the document to look at your suggestions. Yeah. So I think that is definitely the other thing to think about for the boar, is if you're wanting this to be used multiple times in a round or not. Because a player at 40 movement speed, which the boar is going to put them at, can already proc it twice. And if you start adding additional features such as haste, long strider, or other spells to be cast, that's also something that could start making it be procced more and more. So let's see here. Live and learn. Starting at 3rd level, your training in the wild has enabled you to know how to find necessary sustenance, deal with wild creatures, and reduce what is safe or not to eat and use. Yeah, see you upgrade. I got you, no problem. You gain proficiency in 2 of the following skills: animal handling, survival, perception, medicine, or nature. If you are already proficient, you gain expertise in those skills, doubling your proficiency bonus. Additionally, you have advantage on ability checks involved with foraging for food, tracking wildlife, skinning or harvesting parts of creatures, and discerning whether or not something is poisonous or harmful if ingested or touched. You also have advantage on checks involving camouflaging areas where your camp as well as traps are set in the wild. The first thing I just want to say, with already gaining an option of one of these two, or like one of these at 3rd level, in addition to gaining all of these bonuses on the second feature, feels like a really heavy level 3. I don't know if it's fully unbalanced, because a lot of this is pretty skill or kind of like very conditionally locked. but it is a lot of features and effects all coming in the first moment you gain this subclass. I think this is going to be something where some of this might need to be stripped out just for simplicity's sake, just because of how much is coming in all at once at this one level when you're first gaining the subclass. Next, in this feature, there's an interesting thing that already exists with Rangers. That's kind of a major feature that already exists outside of their subclass. That being their natural explorer and favored terrain abilities. Let's hear. You're particularly familiar with one type of natural environment and are adept at traveling, surviving in such regions. Choose one type of favored terrain of this listed. When you make an intelligence or wisdom check related to your favored terrain, your proficiency bonus is doubled if you are using a skill that you are proficient in. While traveling for an hour or more in your favored terrain, you gain these following benefits. Difficult terrain doesn't slow your group's travel. Your group can't become lost except by magical means. When you're engaged with another activity, you remain alert to danger. If you're traveling alone, you can move stealthily at a normal pace. When you're foraging, you find twice as much food as you normally would. When tracking creatures, you learn their exact numbers, size, and how long ago they passed through the area. So here we can see rangers within their favored terrain already are gaining double proficiency in skills that they are using. They already have bonuses to foraging for food, bonuses to tracking their wildlife, and basically all their nature effects within that selected terrain type. So Live and Learn is doing two things here. One, it's double focusing. Because characters are already gaining double their proficiency bonus for a lot of these skills in this terrain, by doubling their proficiency bonus again, while they're in their favored terrain, they're basically it is just guaranteed that skills are going to be passing, especially at a certain level. Because this is making at third level, you're basically without any other bonus to a skill that you're expected to be decent at, are going to be gaining a +6 or more. Some cases, even a +8 proficiency bonus if it is a skill you have expertise in. You're going to be getting some very insane bonuses very early in a campaign. More dangerously, though, this feature is stepping on toes. Because this feature doesn't call out favored terrain, but is granting bonus proficiencies, advantage on foraging for food, tracking wildlife, skinning and harvesting, then what it's basically saying is the terrain doesn't matter anymore. All of these bonuses to stealth, difficult terrain, let's see here, remaining alert, gathering food, everything the natural explorer does on your preferred terrain doesn't matter because you're gaining most of these features on all terrain types due to this. What I think Live and Learn might need to do is either directly reference your favored terrain. Maybe these effects only affect your favorite terrain, or what might be interesting is this allows you to select an additional 1 or 2 favored terrains to have bonuses applied to, simply because if a subclass starts stepping on a class's existing features, then you're going to get this kind of recursive issue happening where choices made in the past are made to feel unimportant, unimpactful, or just kind of drain the flavor from your survivalist that you designed to be really good in the mountains. A dwarven survivalist who grew up on the mountain service, but it doesn't really matter because they already have bonuses now to whether they're in the desert, they're in the forest, anywhere at all. They're good everywhere. The flavor you had added in is essentially getting stripped out, which is just something to be very careful of with a subclass feature in particular. Well, the last one here is you also have advantage on checks involving camouflaging area where you camp, as well as the traps you set up in the wild. This is just a minor thing. Instead of saying advantage, because of how hiding and traps work, instead basically being detected, whether it's you being detected while hiding or traps being detected where they are, you won't be having an advantage in setting them up. Instead, what you want to look at is imposing a disadvantage on enemies discovering it. So let's hear. Checks involving camouflaging areas where you camp, as well as traps you have set up in the wild, will impose a disadvantage upon perception or investigation checks to find them. I really like this kind of bringing up of traps. I feel like not a lot of things really explore giving the players fun ways to play around with traps and camouflage, which is one of my favorite things that this class does. But just to kind of know, this isn't going to be about gaining an advantage, but instead imposing a disadvantage is a much better way to think about it. Let's see here. Tempered by nature. Starting at 7th level, the harsh life of living in nature has come to temper your body, make you more resilient to your surroundings. You have advantage on saving throws against disease and poison effects, as well as extreme temperatures. Additionally, you are resistant to poison, damage, and gaining levels of exhaustion due to environmental effects. You can lose such levels of exhaustion by taking a short rest. This is obviously a very calm level 7. I've started to notice that a lot with you, and maybe that's something that all PHB subclasses do. It seems level 7 is kind of your go-to calming point, and I really like that choice. I really like it happening here. And this is definitely feeling like a much calmer level to what has happened previously. I think, again, this is another feature I wish interacted with favored terrain in some way. Because this is so survivally focused, and the main thing rangers look at with their survival and exploring abilities is their favored terrain feature. I really wish this would be brought up, referenced, or an important piece to how tempered by nature works. I think I'm going to have also some additional questions about poison effects. Does this include in combat? Do you have advantage against spells that cause poison damage? Is this only environmental effects that cause poison damage? Or the poisoned status effect? Does this not affect poison damage at all and only affects the status effect of poison? In which case, again, does that relate to any spell that's cast at you, any environmental features, or anything at all that might be imposing such an effect like that? This is just something important to think about with poison. Is a lot of times it feels like it's mostly natural, but spells are more commonly what's going to be introducing the poisoned status effect. But also consider some things like poisoned potions. Is that the same thing as what you're thinking about? Or does your character gain resistance to any poison, whether it's natural or not? As well as alcohol, I think is a very interesting question. Traditionally is used by giving the poisoned status effect, but might be something that is or isn't affected by tempered by nature. I feel like there's a lot of different ways to become poisoned or to suffer from poison that might actually be falling out of what you imagined here. And so it was worth taking another look at to see, is this all instances of the poisoned... Oh, that's hella wrong. Give me a second. Poise and Ed status. Let's hear. We'll leave it like that. And the level of exhaustion due to environmental effects, I think I just love. Again, just because of how rangers already work, I wish there was some reference to preferred terrain here, their favored terrain, just because it's such an integral part to rangers that all this survival skill kind of either circumventing it or forgetting about it just feels really off for a subclass directly tied to it. Master of Camouflage. Starting at 11th level, you can craft outfits using local foliage, plants, and dirt to blend in with your environment. Wait a second, I just realized I could see the great last name of our tardy. Hey, hold up. You can see that? Or do you see that? Stop. Wherever you're looking, stop. Stop that. Grrr. Grrr. You better not drop that shit, crazy. I'll fucking throw shit at you. I will throw water bottles at you. Be prepared. Who's on a message? Alright, well then, guess we won't be looking in messages now. Top, middle. Fuck me! Damn it. Let's see here. Give me 2 seconds, everybody. I just got a quick little thing. Let's see here. This is a 150. Ooh, that seems pretty nice. Yeah, okay. Ooh, nope. Hey, get out of here, Milkblade. Nope. There we go. No problems. Everything is resolved. Let's just make this nice and big. There, you guys like make it nice and big. There you go. Hey, look, no problems, right? There's no further problems. Damn it. Alright. Well then. Moving on. Starting at 11th level, you can craft outfits using local foliage, plants, dirt to blend in with the environment. When spending a short rest, you can craft an amount of camouflage outfits equal to your proficiency modifier. These outfits only work in the local environment its elements were harvested from. While someone wears such an outfit, if they are prone and completely still, they are indistinguishable from the surrounding environment and cannot be detected by smell and vision-based perception checks. If they speak, move, stand, or try to perform any action, the outfits give them stealth checks. Gives their stealth checks a bonus equal to your survival skill modifier. These outfits are impossible to make or utilize if there isn't a form of usable vegetation around to make them with. Oh, no, we can't. It's not like you can't see it later in the VOD. I know, there's only so much I can do, crazy. Guess I gotta delete the VOD. You heard crazy, guys. He wants me to delete the VOD and not archive this episode. So I guess that's what I gotta do. Understand. Thank you for the help. God damn it, Google. Now, I'm going to say, honestly, first of all, conceptually, thematically, flavor-wise, and mechanically, I love this. I love this feature from beginning to end. You can see there are no notes on it. It still has a bit of my same questioning of wanting it to be a little involved with favored terrain in one way or another. But honestly, I just love this. I think I might have a couple of questions about are this if they're usable, if there's no vegetation. How does this relate to like someone who is really good in a desert environment? Obviously, there's normally a small amount of vegetation around, but vegetation isn't usually the chief elements of desert or especially Arctic based camouflage. So I might have a little bit of a question about the need for vegetation. If this is more about needing the materials to make the camouflage, then I definitely understand. There's a baseline amount of resources you need to be able to gather here to make it. But there are a couple of environment types, which include ocean, Arctic, and desert, that aren't inherently vegetated to a degree that camouflage is made, that I think might be interesting to think about here. But just this stationary, indistinguishable stealth element that your ranger is able to make for the party just really gets me excited. Really starts making me think about the fun ways to play around with this. It also raises the question of what happens for a ranger whose favored terrain is an urban environment that has vegetation. How good are players able to hide in the middle of the road when their ranger has made them some urban environment camouflage? Obviously, it's a very stupid visual that I'm creating, but also one that gets me really excited to play around with. Maybe it could be handled kind of like mantles from Monster Hunter, so the hunter has a base ghillie suit, which they can craft from cloth and stuff and upgrade with the surrounding items, vegetation. Yeah, that is an interesting idea. Is the idea that you need the vegetation to add to a base cloth that isn't inherently camouflaged to environments. But I still think, especially for Arctic environments or are in natural environments that are pretty vegetation drained, think high mountains, Arctic stuff that's a little bit on that end. Are those then environments that are inherently impossible to camouflage using this feature? Or are there maybe some conditional rules about vegetation that should come up for devoid environments? And finally, wild inspired. Starting at 15th level, you can practice and make use of your survival techniques much easier and quicker than before. Just dip the suit in glue and cover it in sand. You're in my wheelhouse, Martial. And you become slightly more aggressive when fighting, much like the ferocious beasts around you. At the end of a long rest, you can switch around survival tactics as you see fit. Additionally, you can spend your bonus action to make another normal attack when in combat. Let's hear. What I'm going to say is the first portion of this, I absolutely love, love, love. The end of a long rest, you can switch around your survival tactics as you see fit. There's something super satisfying about basically making a choice as you're leveling up, and then eventually at a point being like, free reign, choose whatever you like, and being able to swap these around at will. That feels really powerful, really rewarding, and is playing around with a feature the player is also already super familiar with that I love from beginning to end here. This next feature I think is fine, but is a little out of place thematically with the rest of this entire subclass. With as survival, nature, skill, and this kind of production of traps and camouflage focus this one is. This just, your bonus actions are now normal attacks. Feels really dull. I think it's balanced. I hate sand. It gets everywhere. It's coarse and it's rough. And it's not soft like chat is. That honestly, what I want to see here is let's make traps. Let's start making like in combat traps. I want to start seeing like things that can be made from specific environments. I would love this idea of like forest makes this like in combat action. Desert makes different one. This idea of like at the beach it's fine, but after the beach that's when it's really a large pain. That's fair enough, I guess. This idea of being able to make either traps or maybe to kind of more play off this, you know, your bonus action as another action. Like as a bonus action, you can use maybe the environment or sorry about that. Environment or unique crafted item to do some sort of in combat use an environment or unique crafted item. So forest in action. So like maybe in the forest this is something about making use of the abundance of resources you have. You can think poisoned berries / mushrooms. You could think something like deadfall / spike traps that you have prepared in combat, essentially. What are traps in D&D exactly? Like, could I build a bear trap big enough to snatch a dragon? So there are some rules, mostly available to the DM, about traps and the like, that can be given to players, though most of the classes don't really play around with them very well. Let's see, this could be basically a cactus / scorpion pouch that you get to throw on or over the opponent in combat. I just feel like this feature here, as it's written, is so thematically out of place with everything that's happened up to this point that it could be just made so much more interesting, so much more survival focused, so much more about the environment you're in. That would just be amazing, I think, for a subclass to be allowed to play around with. This is obviously going to create, if you go around the way I'm suggesting, a lot of work looking at a unique action for each environmental type. Let's see, how many are there? Yeah, so we'll grab these and we'll say there's let's see, most traps the DM is using are things you encounter in dungeons, which are very few players use. But I think most DMs would also allow you to do something like making a bear trap to try and snatch a dragon, digging pit traps, or making deadfall traps. I love how the Survivalist went from the Totem Barbarian to Bear Grylls to Rambo. Yeah, there's something kind of interesting about the progression. But I really think converting this like bonus action to make a normal attack just could have so much, oh no, so much more interest to it, so much more engagement to it if we instead make it these unique actions based on the environment that are either traps or just like in combat things you can do that are like similar to traps that get to really get used right away. Yeah, most would, however, I'm unsure if there are rules in the game to take that form. Yeah, and this, though, like is being said, is because of how kind of loose, vague, and DM focused existing trap rules are, is something that's really going to have a lot of effort put into it if you want to make something from scratch here to be super entertaining. I think looking at the Arcane Archer for some like effect ideas, like let's take a look here. Mines are mines are a magic C4. Could be something interesting you could do, say, as an Underdark trap, is making use of sulfur and saltpeter to make like a mild explosive you can use in a fight. But Marcial, most of those rules are really down to DM response to things, just because having the ideas set up for all existing traps are generally not a thing that already exists. Let's hear. So I think looking around at some of the boys that have a lot of like options, um, like looking at the effects of the bursting arrow and the enfeebling arrow. So you weave necrotic magic. When the creatures hit, they take 2d6 necrotic damage. They must succeed on a constitution saving throw, or the damage dealt by its weapon attack is halved until the start of your turn. This could very easily be reflavored as some sort of poison ivy, cactus, or other plant from an environmental thing, where you're throwing a net made of this dangerous material on the opponent that is causing them to take some amount of poison or other type of damage. So an unstable elemental crystal with a remote detonator. Depends how remote you want to get. You could always just make an unstable crystal with a good archer nearby. Because I feel like this is a type of effect that could very easily be converted into like a poisoned net made out of some sort of unique forest ivy or desert plant. I want to create feudal magic traps. Hell yeah. But I think that's really what I gotta say for that is I think balance wise, this is shoot. This all is fine, but just lacks some serious interest and theming and flavor when it comes to this bonus action to make a normal attack when in combat. When I feel like if you're willing to really look through, come up with some unique ideas, and create a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 like unique bonus actions to be done within a specific environment in combat that's similar to an attack action, I think you could create something really unique, really engaging, and falls perfectly into the existing theming that this subclass already has. So, I guess as the quick boil down, I'd want to look again at the balance of the boar and fox. Of this first selection of kind of choices, these are the ones that feel really out of balance with everything else. With Live and Learn, this is where you definitely want to look at the existing ranger features, especially in favored environment. It's such an integral part to being a ranger that the fact that this is to a degree stepping on its toes might be something that either needs to be examined, mentioned, or need to be a required part of how Live and Learn works and functions. Tempered by nature is another thing that I think is ultimately fine, and I really like certain levels of it. But to keep in mind, stealthing and hiding things is more about imposing disadvantage as opposed to gaining an advantage. And also, this is a thing I think would be really interesting to, again, relate to the environment you're used to. I love Master of Camouflage. Keep it, and find the best ways to play around with it. That is so interesting, and I'm in love with it. but maybe look at the vegetation rule and think about some ways that certain environments that are inherently devoid of vegetation might want their own custom rules to get around that. Let's hear. I noticed that the survivalist is depending on their crafting skills, but since they find more plants and so on resources, shouldn't be a problem. Maybe the survivalists should have to work more for their powerful skills, like higher crafting requirements, or like introducing these sort of bonus actions that are required to be crafted ahead of time in certain environments is why I really like this idea. Though upgrade, if this is something you're not super into, this idea of making a list of prepped actions to use, I can also understand that being just something you don't find interesting or you don't want to sink your teeth into. But all in all, I think there's some balancing stuff early on and just kind of a breakdown of looking at how this wants to relate to how the ranger class already works that I think needs to be kind of looked at again, especially through the vein of favored environments. Ultimately, though, I really love this survivalist crafting direction that the subclass really starts to go down to, and would love to see it get doubled down and brought into this whole new kind of area of crafting bonus actions to use in combat eventually. And with that, I think many of you can already hear it. I am at the end of my rope, and we are up against time. So I'm afraid we will not be making it to the sunshade this evening, but we will be hitting it up next. Ubu, no, did you just get here? Oh, I'm so sorry, Ubu. Oh, no. I'm afraid we will be saying goodnight here to you all. Eric, I have no idea what you're talking about. Your clock is broken. No, 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 crazy Seth the second. Popping in to say hi, jumping around. Oh, okay, that's good then, Ubu. It's an hour off. It's an hour off. Really? Okay. Well then, I'll just take a second to look at my uptime. Oh, would you look at that? Crazy Seth. But I'm afraid I have to wish you all a good night. No crazy. I hope to see you all next Friday as we get back into Mass Effect with my new and updated overheats. Everything should be running a bit smoother, and I'll be reaching out to try to get myself a secondary monitor to let everything run as smooth as possible. One question: what if the survivalist has a necro in his party? Could he craft a huge bunch of camo suits for the zombies and skeletons? Well, the number of suits that can be crafted was limited by proficiency modifier, so at most he'd be able to craft is 6. But I see no reason why they couldn't be put on zombies and the like. So next week we'll be going into part 2 of our Mass Effect playthrough, where hopefully a lot of the jank is pulled out. And next Saturday, when we get back into Dungeons and Dragons, we'll be going ahead and doing a breakdown of the Sunshade. But after that, I think I'm excited to get back into story time. Unfortunately, this is where I need to call it for the evening. So I will be saying good night to you all. And see you next time. What about the reading stream? Well, I'm thinking of doing that tomorrow if I have time, but I cannot promise it, as I do have my own D&D session tomorrow. So there might not be a good time slot for me to plug it in. If it does not happen Sunday, I might be looking around maybe Monday or Wednesday. But if all else fails, I'll work hard to find somewhere that I could plug it in, since you all really want to go there. But I can't keep cutting off my good night to you. So good night, all. and I'll see you next week.